There once was a painter from Austria. His name was Dolfie. His last name escapes me now, but that's not important. What is though is just how. He grew up with a dad that knocked him around quite a bit, and a mom that protected him another. When still a young man full of dreams, Dolfie moved to Vienna to seek luck as an artist. But those know-it-alls at the School of Art rejected him twice. He became a little bit of a layabout who spent whatever money he made from some paintings and postcards he worked on and secret allowances from mom in those fancy street-side coffee shops. A lot of intellectuals gathered there to discuss the trending ideas of the time. Among those, the not-so-nice things they said about the Star of David people. It was a time of strong nationalisms, the fervor one feels for the identity of one's country within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And Dolfie was no stranger to that. Except not for Austria, no. Ethnically, he and his family were from the great nation of Germany, that powerful, proud industrialist giant, veering to become a colonial colossus late in the race, overtaking the fading British Empire. That is, until the Great War broke out. The year prior to that, Dolfie's inheritance had allowed him to move to Munich. He had avoided the draft into the Austrian army as well, and now enrolled in the German army to fight for ideals he actually wanted to defend. He fought on the Western Front against Britain and its allies. Dolfie was in charge of taking information to the trenches amidst the whistling of bullets and the roaring of mortars. Aside from mustard gas permanently ruining his voice towards the end, Dolfie was doing alright. Germany had defeated the Russians in Prussia on the Eastern Front and sunken commercial American ships headed for Britain on the Western one. And then in November of 1918, the war ended. Germany lost. The soldiers were just as surprised as the people back home. Dolfie stayed in the army and watched from the safety of the military structure how the once powerful and proud nation got dismantled. Via the Treaty of Versailles, the Allies gave Germany's loss the title of armistice instead of surrender. It didn't help. Article 231 of the treaty forced Germany to take the blame for the war, to make concessions of its territory, and limit its number of soldiers to 100,000. The Allies stripped Germany's navy and army and decommissioned its air force. Germans couldn't build warships or planes, had to give up the colonies in Africa and their coal mines, and not least of all, pay reparations of $500 billion for the war to the Allies after spending all of its money on the war itself. Its form of government was a no-go as well, so no more Kaiser for them. They now would establish a liberal democracy with a president, a chancellor in charge of the cabinet and its everyday operations, and a parliament. Dolfie had seen how futile parliaments were within the Austro-Hungarian Empire, with sessions ending in full-on fistfights, and believed only a strong figure could put things in order. When you lose a war you thought was en route to victory, someone needs to take the blame for it. Those ideas Dolfie consumed alongside his coffee in Vienna were only reinforced by classes he took while in the army, taught by German nationalist professors to combat Bolshevik influence. Dolfie and those who thought like him blamed the communists and the Star of David people. The year 1919 saw the birth of the Weimar Republic. The Reichstag was the place whence all decisions were made. President Ebert and his cabinet had the impossible task of paying reparations to the Allies. They either had to reduce government spending to balance their meager budget, or increase the budget by printing money to jumpstart the economy. They chose to print money, and as an Argentine I can tell you, it was the wrong choice. The exchange rate in 1920 was 64.8 marks to $1. In 1923 it was more than 1 billion marks to $1. People loaded money on carts to head for the bakery and buy one loaf of bread. They succumbed to hunger on the streets. Workers got paid twice a day as the prices rose by the hour. The middle class was destitute. France and Belgium invaded key areas of German production, and the response of the government was the perfect recipe for seething anger: passive resistance. Dolfie moved up to giving the classes himself, thus honing his oratory skills, and then joined the German Workers' Party as a central speaker, his voice rugged with the anger of the German people. They bent philosophical thought, such as Nietzsche's will to power, and scientific knowledge, such as Darwin's On the Origin of Species, to their extreme nationalism and other extreme beliefs. From central speaker he went to head of propaganda, renamed it, and became its president. Rallies became numerous, in which Dolfie promised mainly to give Germany back its greatness. The Reichstag used such a system of representation that even regional parties had a say, thus allowing for an over-proliferation of parties, preventing a majority in the parliament. The party, whose name also seems to escape me, was one more fringe group among many who promised extreme methods for extreme solutions. It was national and socialist, so it must have been pretty cool. Then is when Dolfie surrounded himself with the usual suspects: the Joeys, the Rudys, and the Henrys. Dolfie blamed the foul economic conditions on the Star of David people who supposedly controlled the banks, those same ones who had lost Germany the war. He believed his cause to be so strong that in 1923, Dolfie took 600 stormtroopers to surround the Burger Brau Keller, a beer hall usually reserved for political meetings, in which the State Commissionary of Bavaria held a meeting of about 3,000 people. Dolfie walked in, fired a shot into the air, and proclaimed the revolution to have broken out. The next morning they would march toward the Bavarian ministry. That they did, but on the way the Bavarian police opened fire, taking some down and arresting others. A failed coup d'etat provided the party with secular martyrs and with a myth and symbols. Victory through defeat, such as those of Leonidas in the Thermopylae and Iskolas at Siritis, though the party, for now, fell apart. The sentence for Dolfie's treason was 5 years in prison. A lot of time to think and write. He wrote this book, the title of which too escapes me. I do remember it was about his struggles and the use of propaganda, and to further blame the communists and certain religious group. Of his 5-year sentence, he served less than 1, and the book was a success. In 1925, the Weimar Republic got a new president, Paul von Hindenburg. To this old-school conservative, the former fringe Dolfie was a would-be puppet he could use against the Red Menace. Upon his release from jail, Dolfie was banned from public speaking, his main weapon. Hindenburg stabilized an economy in which printing money costed more than what the money was worth. Through the DOS plan, America lent money to Germany to build its economy back up. With its increased tax revenue, Germany paid reparations to the Allies, who in turn paid war loans back to America. Germany returned to the League of Nations, women got to vote, and the value of its currency was back. And then, the Great Depression squashed all progress. The US pressed for payments of the war debt to its former allies, Britain and France, who further pressed Germany for reparation payments. Germany, by 1930, was back in the slump of years past. Something interesting happens when hunger strikes the stomachs of the common folk. Their ears open up to solutions of the most extreme kind. Dolfie was an unpalatable character, all right, but not as much as one would be led to believe now, given anti-Semitism and racism were more of the norm back then. He was a black spot against a dark grey background, not a white one. As a German from the 1930s would say, "Hey yo, Dolfie, move along the hate speech and keep talking about those sweet solutions to our problems. I mean, I can't stand them either, but I gotta eat."
Huh?
Or something along those lines. Dolfie brought back the party. It was organized in all strata of society. Organizations for all professions in all socio-economic levels, with leaders in every region. Dolfie's failed venture as an artist proved to not have been a complete waste of time. In the elections of September of 1930, they earned 18.3% of the votes, compared to the 2% leading up to the failed coup of 1923. They earned that through effective propaganda in the form of masterful graphic design and, yes, violence on the streets. By late 1931, conservatism was on its way out. Hindenburg withdrew his support for Chancellor Brüning and came to terms with Dolfie, all after Brüning had supported Hindenburg against Dolfie, who came in second in the presidential elections of March of 1932. In May, Brüning resigned after the re-election of Hindenburg. Franz von Papen became new chancellor, a figure close to legacy industrialists and landowners who missed the great days of yore. Which didn't mean he wouldn't try to gain the favor of Dolfie and his massive support by lifting the ban on the party after the street riots. Since majority had been difficult to achieve through all these years, von Papen took it upon himself to call for new parliamentary elections in July. Dolfie's party became the largest in parliament, with 37.27% of the votes, the highest they will ever get in legitimacy, granted by workers, unemployed people, peasants, and middle-class folks. By November, that percentage had fallen to 33.09%, though still the largest party. It urged them to make a move or fade into the back rows of the parliament. Dolfie rejected the position of minister under von Papen, since he had failed to take away their majority in the last elections, and demanded chancellorship for himself, which Hindenburg rejected. Hindenburg still thought he could tame Dolfie, one providing power, the other popularity. Hindenburg had ties to the industrialists, Dolfie to the people. Though Hindenburg didn't know about Dolfie's own secret meetings with the industrialists and landowners. He was the barrier against communism and could speak both the dialects of the oligarchs and the everyday men. Von Papen hadn't been able to defeat Dolfie. His replacement, von Schleicher, couldn't split the party by asking one of Dolfie's men to be his vice-chancellor. Hindenburg saw no other way out but to make Dolfie chancellor, keeping a wary eye on him. It wouldn't be until February of 1933 that Hindenburg would see how wrong he was. The Reichstag building burned, the blame for which went to the communists. If they did that, then what could they do next? Through the Reichstag decree, which wasn't out of place, since Hindenburg had spent most of the previous year bypassing the parliament with decrees, the party took action against all political meetings, arresting and shooting who they deemed dangerous, even in detriment of civil liberties. Article 48 of the decree granted Dolfie greater than normal powers. The Republic was dead. Be that as it may, Dolfie was not in complete control of Germany. The party is still worried about public opinion, as any politician from any era does. In March, he passed the so-called Enabling Act, which allowed him to pass laws without consent of the parliament or the president. Communists could vote if they could make it to the voting booth first. He took a break your hand and asked you to write your name approach with them. It worked. Not the Reichstag, but Dolfie's cabinet commanded now. Then followed the last touches of his work: the streamlining of society. Youth groups of other parties and other parties themselves no longer existed. Nor did trade unions, replaced now by the German Labor Front. The army would swear a personal oath not to Germany but to Dolfie himself. You see the question turning from how could such a character have risen to power to how such a character couldn't have given the circumstances. There once was a painter from Austria. And what was his last name again? Whatever. It's not like there's gonna be another one. Right?